The Haftorah that we will read tomorrow includes these words some of you know. Is this the fast that I have chosen, a day to starve the body? Is it to bow the head as a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loosen the fetters of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? It is to share your bread with the hungry, and to bring the poor that are cast out into your house. And when you see the naked, to cover him, and not ignore your own kin. These words from the Haftorah of Yom Kippur will ring loudly in our sanctuary tomorrow. They call upon us to build a society of Shalom. Shalom, as we know, means peace, but it shares a Hebrew root with the word shalem, meaning complete or whole. So the meaning Shalom is more like the peaceful coexistence of all parts of the entirety, all parts of the whole with a W, W-H-O-L-E. The translation is more like harmony, and the concept is related to it, a sense of the unity of all things interacting peacefully together. This is Shalom, a harmonious unity that is a reflection of the unity we claim as a key aspect of divinity each time we say the Shema. A society of Shalom, harmonious unity, is desperately needed in our world today, including within Jewish civilization, America, Europe, Africa, Asia, just about everywhere we look in the world. On Yom Kippur, we atone not only for our own sins, we atone for the sins of our entire community and our society within which we are participants. Just as in the Torah reading tomorrow and in tomorrow's Avodah service that commemorates the temple sacrifice, the temple service, which we do an adaptation of. In that service, the high priest atones for himself, and then he atones for himself in his household, and then he atones for himself in his household and the entire people, concentric circles. So do we atone for ourselves, and then for ourselves in our community, and then for ourselves in our community and the world around us. We all together are intertwined with each other. We are part of each other. So we cannot avoid responsibility for what goes on around us. There's a Talmudic teaching that reads, Kol Yisrael aravim zeh bazeh. All Israel is responsible for each other. Or maybe more, all Israel aravim zeh bazeh. All Israel is mixed in together with each other. All Israel is collateral for each other. We are each other's guarantee. This principle applies in many ways, including the responsibility we have to each other to make sure that no one in our community is lacking in basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, and medical care. The principle has also long been applied in the obligation to see to it that when non-Jewish authorities took hostages from our community for ransom, that somehow we saw to it that those captives were free. That was a huge mitzvah, is a huge mitzvah, and it was a huge issue in the past 2,000 years of the authorities around us taking hostages from our community and holding them for ransom. So this becomes a deeply rooted precept in our tradition, freeing the captives, amplified by generations of experience when non-Jewish authorities would take Jewish hostages in that way. And I'm sure you can see how this concept has been part of what has been driving developments in the Middle East since October 7th, 2 years ago. literally, the freeing of captives is a religious mitzvah. It is also true that, especially over the course of the last 2 centuries, as Jews were allowed to become more integrated into the larger society around us, that we extended this concept of mutual responsibility to include the world around us, which we were becoming more and more a part of. All humankind, then, in our view, bears responsibility for each other, especially in this ever increasingly smaller world. And yet we find that in our day it has become increasingly fashionable in many corners to take an increasingly narrow view of the world. There's a particularly Jewish view of America that was once voiced by the American Jewish poet Emma Lazarus, who lived only 38 years from 1848 to 1887. It is not exclusively a Jewish view of America. Many others have held this view as well, but it is reflective very much of Jewish experience and aspirations for America. It is a very Jewish view of America. In 1883, she composed a poem as part of a national effort to raise funds to build a pedestal for the Statue of Liberty in New York, where she lived. You've heard this before. Regarding the Statue of Liberty, she wrote, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp," cries she with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Every time I hear that poem, I think of the moment my grandfather showed me this photograph. He was a photographer. He showed me this photograph of the Statue of Liberty, and then he told me, "I took this picture from the boat when we arrived from Europe in 1940. This view of America as a place of refuge where oppressed people everywhere else in the world can find refuge was certainly never fully realized, but it has remained a widespread, animating value for this country, at least until recently. To be sure, there are times when the country has not lived up to this vision, and there have been times when public officials acted to challenge or reverse it, and we are in one of those times. Not long ago, agencies of our government would celebrate the idea that we were a nation of immigrants. Now the general message is, immigrants, stay away. When you read the course of Jewish history right up to the present moment, it is easy to see why so many Jews were drawn to this vision of America as a beacon of liberty, freedom, and refuge for all. We Jews have often been in need of places of refuge. We have sought asylum in new lands, even up to the current generation. But now we live in a land where leaders seem committed to oppress, even simply grab right off the street people who even resemble asylum seekers. We also live in a land where access to health care, which has never been universal, is getting harder. Access to food for the hungry is getting scarcer. Rights of the accused are less protected. Cultural diversity is less respected. Meanwhile, as summer temperatures soar, glaciers melt, and smoke from extreme wildfires invade our skies, there is so much else more immediate going on that we are barely talking about climate change anymore. Institutions that are meant to protect the populace from the effects of natural disasters, epidemics, medical crises, industrial environmental disasters, and economic exploitation are being undermined, and standards for truth-telling no longer exist. The Torah speaks of the obligations of the more powerful to the less powerful in a just and moral society. In Deuteronomy we read, "When you lend your neighbor any manner of a loan, you shall not go into his house to fetch his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the one to whom you have lent shall bring forth the pledge outside to you. And if he be poor, you shall not sleep with his pledge," which is presumably his cloak, since that is the last valuable thing that someone's going to give up, and clothing is very valuable because of the intense labor it took to create it. "You shall not sleep with his pledge if he's poor. You shall surely restore to him the pledge when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his garment and bless you, and it shall be righteousness unto you before the Lord your God. You shall not oppress a hired servant," think employee, "that is poor and needy, whether he be whether he be native or whether he be one of the strangers that are in your land." Immigrant workers. "In the same day you shall give him his wages, neither shall the sun go down upon it." Pay your employees on time. "For he is poor and sets his heart upon it, lest he cry against you to the Lord, and it be a transgression of you, or by you." "Parents shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for their parents. Every person shall only be punished for their own sin. You shall not pervert the justice due to the stranger or the orphan, nor take the widow's garment in pledge, but you shall remember that you were strangers in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. And when you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. And you shall remember that you were bondsmen in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this." What we are reading here, literally, the obligations of the more powerful to the less powerful in society, the obligations of the creditor to the debtor, the obligations of the employer to the employee, the obligations of the rich to the poor, the obligations of the judicial courts to the convicted, the obligations of the entire society not to oppress the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, the three most vulnerable categories of people in society. Today we live in a society which is moving fast and far in an opposite direction. We need to reclaim an ethos of respect for each other, an ethic of respect for the range of diversity that encompasses humankind. This should be a society of Shalom. At their best, democracy and the processes that sustain democracy are among the most important mechanisms in modern society for maintaining such a society of Shalom. But today, around the world, institutions of democracy itself are under attack. And many political analysts have written about this, but one particular list that I found I thought was particularly helpful. This is the thought of political activist Stacey Abrams of Georgia. She is a politician, so she has her own partisan perspective. But here she is speaking about the fundamentals of democracy itself in the United States, drawing as well on lessons derived from international situations. And as an African American in the southern state of Georgia, she has a family heritage which would lead her to remember the family stories of when her family, her people, were excluded from political process. Stacey Abrams describes a 10-step authoritarian playbook for undermining democracy, which I present here as a summary of scholarship that I've been reading that depicts how democratic society is transformed into authoritarian society in current times. 10 steps. 1, win a free election, then end free elections. 2, weaken and neutralize competing powers such as Congress and the judiciary. 3, gut the government by firing experts and dismantling agencies. 4, install loyalists in key positions rather than qualified public servants. 5, attack the media by demonizing journalism and creating an echo chamber of propaganda. 6, identify scapegoats and target vulnerable groups to sow division. 7, undermine civil society by targeting legal aid, universities, and philanthropies. I must have missed something, miscounted here. Incentivize and use private violence to intimidate dissenters, and cancel elections entirely when the public is too afraid to resist. That one part is maybe the one part that hasn't been done yet. Although, I note the outright elimination in 2020, outright elimination of most Republican Party primaries in 2020. I don't know if you noticed that. Half the Republican primaries in 2020 didn't take place. So there never was a chance for the current president not to gain that nomination. The elections just didn't happen. When you compare this list to actual happenings, the situation is more than startling. I see the expansion of unilateral executive authority through repeated declarations of emergency when there is no measurable actual urgency. Unilateral dismantling of entire federal agencies established by Congress. Attacking universities and colleges in the name of protecting us from anti-Semitism, which we must note is not only quite cynical, but also very dangerous for us as Jews. The use of brute force and the creation of an atmosphere of intimidation, such as in unnecessarily deploying the National Guard and members of the Marines in cities governed by your political opponents. Pardoning and returning to the streets convicted perpetrators, including private militia members of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol and on members of Congress, so that they can rejoin the ranks of the intimidators. Creating a federally funded, secretly operated masked national police force to whisk people off the street and transport them secretly to distant camps before engaging in any due process. Building an expansive network of prison camps to hold these people in inhumane conditions without legal recourse or outside communication. Openly using the Justice Department to attack political opponents. Literally suing judges, every federal judge in Maryland. Literally suing judges whose legal decisions you object to. Suing and restricting the ability of law firms to do business if they assist plaintiffs in protecting their legal rights against the way the government is challenging the rule of law. Suing media outlets such as most television networks already and many newspapers, defunding media outlets like public broadcasting, and dismantling media outlets like Voice of America, and using the federal government, including the Federal Communications Commission, to intimidate media based on what they say and report. Openly restricting what media outlets can report about federal agencies, such as the Department of Defense, even when it does not involve classified information. Attacking comedians, and that is important because more people pay attention to comedians than to news. Suing states for not handing over to them sensitive personal information about all registered voters. Openly demanding mid-decade gerrymandering of election districts to increase their electoral advantage. Every time I think of these, I hear of another one of these developments, I think of the stories my grandmother told me of years ago. My grandmother telling me stories when she lived in Berlin from 1930 to 1933. Stories of when the Reichstag burned and she was skiing and a soldier came up to her and said, "I would go home if I were you, Fraulein. There's going to be trouble." State of emergency was declared. Power was extended. April 1st, 1933, riots, anti-Jewish riots on the streets. My grandparents eventually fleeing Berlin after my grandfather's passport was taken 3 times. And then being in Vienna in 1938, when Hitler came in, invaded Austria, and they were suddenly living in Vienna, Germany. My grandmother told me of Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938, after an assassination where the Nazi party blamed their political opponents, not their political opponents actually, the Nazi party blamed the Jews for the assassination. This is what I thought of the first moment I heard the reaction of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who I hadn't heard of before, but shame on me for not knowing that was out there. The Nazis then used radio for 3 days. That was the media, the newest media. They used radio to rail up the population. So everyone knew November 9th, 1938 was going to be riots. There were riots. Synagogues were burned. Most synagogues were burned. There were people murdered, far more than were reported. My grandmother told me that she was at home that morning, and they had a maid who came that morning. It was common to do that. It was convenient for them, and it provided employment for the maid, who was usually a young, maybe a teenage girl. She showed up with 3 eggs, which my grandmother said was important, was significant before refrigeration. She showed up with 3 eggs, and she said, "I wouldn't take the little one out tonight if I were you." So plenty of people could see what was going on. Plenty of people were concerned and objected to what was going on. And this is the part that's most frightening to me. Plenty of people could see what was going on and objected to what was going on, but somehow no one who objected found a way to turn things around. So I list those 10 steps described by Stacey Abrams because I think it is important for us as we enter into a new year to consider what may be antidotes to these challenges of democracy. What can we do to push back against these attempts around us to undermine democracy, even though the people around my grandparents weren't willing or able? Many were willing and weren't able. So Stacey Abrams herself describes how she suggests pushing back. Drawing from her experience with voter suppression in Georgia and looking at international examples, she concludes, 1, building community and mutual aid. Neighbors should check on one another when social safety nets are weakened. Resisting propaganda and telling the truth. Push back against lies consistently and always. Speak out in defense of persons and groups being demonized and attacked. Did I mention transgender people? No, I don't think I've mentioned that yet. Being demonized and attacked. Creating broad, diverse coalitions. Build coalitions like never before, even across disagreement. Engaging in political action. I found this quote attributed to her. Show up. Show up. In the streets, at the polls, in every contested space where power is exercised. Using every level of government to deliver for people. Civic leaders can act at any level of society. I found a note attributed to her urging actions from creating gardens to providing public health resources at state and local levels. Supporting and defending democratic institutions. Speak out against the gutting of public institutions meant to protect the public good, like the Centers of Disease Control and attacks on efforts like diversity, equity, and inclusion. As far as the Centers of Disease Control, I was checking, as far as I could, checking the internet the other day just to find out how Ebola was doing in the Congo, since I don't know that the Centers of Disease Control are going to tell us. We'll find out whether it's coming here once it arrives. And confront voter suppression. Draw attention to gerrymandering and tampering with the voter rolls. Like the federal government suing 6 states now for 6 Democratic states for their voter rolls. As I summarized in last week's comments, build community and resist divisiveness, create broad and diverse coalitions, learn each other's truths to resist falsehood and deception, speak words of integrity, commit acts of kindness, teach compassion, assist each other in times of need. If you are on a blue island in a red sea, for example, invite people over to plant a garden. One of the basic teachings of Jewish tradition is of the importance and the need for Shabbat. It may sound like a real change in topic, but to all that I've said, it must be added that no one person can do all of this. No one person can do all of this. But we have entered a point in history where every person must do some of this. And that's what Shabbat teaches. In 6 days God made heaven and earth, and yet on the 7th day God Shabbat ve'inafash, ceased from activity and was respirited. None of us have an infinite supply of energy. We are not God, and it seems that God didn't have an infinite supply of energy either. None of us can work without cessation. In fact, perhaps we can even accomplish more because of stopping regularly. As Shabbat, a cessation, and especially a shared communal cessation, a shared Shabbat as community can help us reflect and be more grounded in who we are and what we are committed to. All the needed activity I have been describing is grounded in the need for being part of caring community. Shabbat can help sustain caring community. Constant individualized frenzy destroys community. So we need Shabbat in order to build a society of Shalom. Perhaps we need Shabbat to resist those actions that can lead to the destruction of a society of Shalom. Our Haftorah tomorrow morning, which speaks about feeding the poor and releasing the oppressed as the fast which is required today, actually ends with a focus on Shabbat. It says, "You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the paths to dwell in, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath and from pursuing your business on my holy day, if you call the Shabbat a delight and Adonai's holy day honorable, if you honor it not doing your wanted ways, not pursuing your business, nor negotiating arrangements, then shall you delight yourself in the Lord, and I will make you to ride upon the high places of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." I mentioned last week on Rosh Hashanah that interfaith dialogue can be described as an example of living into a hopeful eschatology, a hopeful end of days vision based on a vision of shared learning. I have described a peace garden and dialogue activities around it as an expression of a hopeful eschatology. I have described Rosh Hashanah as Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, but a day of judgment not at the end of time, but at the end of the year, which means it's at the beginning of a new year, so that it offers new opportunities. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment with a do-over. Shabbat also is an example of a hopeful eschatology that we live out as a model every week. Shabbat represents a time when we hope all time will be Shabbat, a day of peace, so that we greet each other on Shabbat by saying Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat represents just about everything Judaism stands for, and each period of the day has a particular thematic emphasis. Erev Shabbat, Friday night, holds a creation theme. 6 days God made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day God ceased from activity and sanctified the day. So we stop after 6 days of creative work and take time to appreciate and celebrate life as we are a part of it. The Kabbalat Shabbat prayers begins with the Psalms commemorating the creation of the universe, and then we move into Shabbat as a period of rest. Saturday morning has an overriding theme of revelation, of the accounts of Sinai receiving the Torah. The prayers of the Siddur for that time reflect this theme. We take out the Torah and read from it in front of the congregation, reenacting the way our people might have heard the Torah at Sinai. The day is a day of study and learning and acquiring Torah in community. The late afternoon, as we approach the end of Shabbat, we have an awareness that soon we will be re-entering the world of work. The theme of the moment turns to the world of the future, and indeed towards an eschatology of hope. We assert a vision of hope that someday all days will be like Shabbat, a day of peace and joy and learning in community. That is why we end Shabbat with spices at Havdalah. The spice box is meant so that we might hold on to the extra soul that we envision as we each acquire on Shabbat, so that as Shabbat ends, we can hold on to the spirit of Shabbat and take it into the week. Each time we observe and celebrate Shabbat, we are affirming a hopeful eschatology, a hopeful vision of how the world should develop. In days like ours, Shabbat, therefore, becomes even more important, not only as a time to recover from the weekday efforts to improve the world, but also as an ongoing reminder of what we need to see in the world, a statement to ourselves and others about what the world should be. So it is more than appropriate when we see that tomorrow's Haftorah, which calls upon us to bring justice and compassion into the world, then ends with an affirmation of Shabbat. In the next year, let us strive together as a community to help remind the world around us what sort of justice and compassion are needed in the world. Let us strive to do this during the week, and let us strive to enter into a pattern of Shabbat observance that makes our teachings clear as well. I wish everyone a year of health, happiness, and shalom. May there be peace and goodness for us, for all the people Israel and all the world. And may you not only be written in the book of life, goodness and peace, but sealed in that book as well, as the Machzor describes. Shana Tova.